Half a day and welcome to the Presidential Lecture Series at the University of Guam. This is the 12th lecture in the series, and it features Dr. Tupeni Bamba, who is held 3 different positions in 3 different democratically elected governments in Fiji, and each time he was removed from office, so it will be a very interesting speech. And President Underwood will do a more formal introduction. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce to you some dignitaries in our audience, and following UOG protocol, first I'd like to introduce our own administrators, and of course the 10th President of the University of Guam, Robert A. Underwood. Our Senior Vice President, Helen Whitby. Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, James Selman. And Interim Dean of the School of Education, Patrick Levy. We also welcome the Honorable Judith T. Wanpat, Speaker of the 31st Guam Legislature. We also welcome Jose Cruz, who is a former president of the University of Guam, and holds several other titles, and Harley Manner, Professor Emeritus. We also welcome the Honorable Yoshiyuki Kimura, Consul General, Consulate of Japan, and the Honorable Bruce Poon, Director, Taipei Economic and Cultural Office. Also joining us today is the Honorable Ben Pangilinan, Senator. And we would be remiss if we did not welcome former Senator Frank Uggin. And the person who gets the gold star for attending the most presidential lecture series is the Honorable Catherine Merriman, Associate Justice, Supreme Court of Guam. Joseph Artero Cameron, who is the President of the Department of Chamorro Affairs and Guam Colony. We welcome the man in uniform back there, David Flores, from the Department of Customs and Quarantine. And Manny Cruz, who is representing the Department of Agriculture. Now, to those of you who have attended these events before, that you know that first we have the presentation by the speaker, which is followed by a Q&A session. And so, as you're listening to the speech, kind of think about something that you would like to ask Dr. Tupeni, and it's kind of a free-flowing conversation. And welcome to all the other faculty members in the audience, and it's great to see so many students. Welcome to everyone. And now I would like to call to the podium the 10th President of the University of Guam, Robert A. Underwood.
Thank you, Kathleen, and it is a pleasure and honor to introduce the 12th speaker in this lecture series. And we normally don't have this lecture series during the summer months, but we decided that the experiences of Dr. Tupeni Bamba merit this. And so he and I have something in common. We're both academicians and politicians. I think so. We're both in the recovery mode in terms of being a politician. So we're recovering politicians, if you will. But of course, he's had a much more interesting career as an elected official. In Fiji, Dr. Tupeni Bamba's name is almost synonymous with the coups, not because he had anything to do with them, but because he has been involved with all 3 democratically elected governments and has been removed from office as a result of the coups. And to put it into context so that we understand the situation, I know many of you are probably students of Fijian history and society and perhaps are very familiar with it, but in some respects it parallels the situation in Guam. We have, in Fiji as in Guam, we have a very large indigenous population and a very large non-indigenous population in which they are trying to figure out politically and socially how to survive in that context. Not to strain the comparison very much, but Fiji is a very large country, a very beautiful country, and it has had issues in terms of trying to deal with this. And Dr. Tupeni Bamba, as a distinguished academician in his own right, has become involved in 3 distinct efforts in which there were attempts to try to form what is essentially we're seeing as multiracial governments, so that there would be some kind of consensus building in this. At the same time, the context of trying to understand what is the role of indigenous people in the home societies remains a pressing issue. And so it is really an important basis upon which to understand some of the trials and tribulations that we go through in order to understand perhaps and bring greater attention and focus to our own issues relative to issues such as Chamorro self-determination and ownership of land and the future of the Chamorro people in the context of Guam and also the context of the Northern Marianas. Apart from his he had 3 different incursions into politics. Dr. Bamba served with distinction as an academic and scholar for over 20 years at the University of the South Pacific. At USP, he served in both university management and as an academic. In the former, he was Dean of Administration and Personnel for 2 years. He was also the first regional or local university registrar at USP from the Pacific region and served 4 years in that post. In the Commonwealth or British system, the registrar is the head of the administration responsible to the vice chancellor, and the university council has a little bit more gravitas associated with it than what we normally, not that the registrar at the University of Guam doesn't have a lot of gravitas, but it's a slightly different system. After some 6 years in university administration, he reverted to his academic post at the Department of Education as associate professor and later was appointed to be professor and head of the Department of Education and Psychology. He was the first professor of education at USP appointed from within the Pacific region. Dr. Bamba also served as the head of the School of Education for 2 terms. He has served or has been attached to a number of overseas institutions. He was appointed as Senior Research Fellow at the University of Auckland Center for Pacific Studies. For 4 years, he had a short attachment to Manchester University School of Education in the UK and the East-West Center's Pacific Island Development Program in Hawaii. He also undertook special visits to universities in the US and UK, but he received most of his university education in Australia. Dr. Bamba's academic interests are in related areas and topics in education, such as teacher education, curriculum evaluation, education and development, education research, and researching into indigenous peoples and their knowledge systems and epistemologies. He maintains a keen interest on Pacific politics and the politics of the coup in Fiji. He has a BA from the University of New England in Australia, an MED from the University of Sydney, and a PhD in education from Macquarie University in Australia. Dr. Bamba is here to join his wife, Dr. Unaisi Bamba, who has a 3-year contract with the University of Guam as an associate professor of education. So the great deal of pleasure that I present to you, Dr. Tupeni Bamba.
Thank you, thank you for your kind introduction. Let me also say hello and to distinguished guests of the university,
fellow senators, friends of the university, representatives from various medical councils here in Guam, distinguished guests of the university, staff and professors of the university, and ladies and gentlemen. I regard an honor to be addressing you today. I'm touched by the introduction by your president. Indeed, we have something in common. I call my involvement in politics as my incursions in politics, where I go in and then kicked out, whereas I spend part of my time at the university institution. I remember meeting Dr. Underwood at one of the distinguished conference in education and development in some universities in Canada. And on that particular occasion, I think we also had discussion with Paula Freire, no, not Paula Freire, but even Illich, whose mission was to abolish schools and de-school society, as some of you may have been familiar with his books. I recall your president holding the floor and spoke with a lot of passion about the tomorrow language and all that. And I followed his career a little bit, and I believe that he has spent a lot of his time in the hallways of the House in the US Congress. And he's recovering from that. I think he has gained a lot of wisdom in the process. I only hope that through my deliberations today, that I will also reflect some of the wisdoms that I picked up on the way through campaigning to be elected in many of the elections of Fiji, only to serve when term was cut in midterm because of what we call in Fiji coups or coups. Fiji has been known as the cuckoo land in the Pacific. It has gained the notoriety or reputation by its many military coups of the last 2.5 decades. Excuse me, can I ask for a map of the Pacific? Please. Right. I think it'll be important for me really to put in context where we're country we're talking about. Fiji is quite in the center, and of course Guam, Micronesia, are well known to us. They are our player. For nearly a quarter of the Fiji population, maybe can I ask for the Fiji map now, and then we get back to this again. Fiji with a population of around about 840,000, not yet a million, of which 57% composed of indigenous Fijians, 37% of Indo-Fijians or Fijians with a heritage from India, the continent of India, who came in 1879 to work in arcade farms, and about 6% of others, mainly descendants from Europe and other Pacific Islanders and Chinese and Asians and all others. That population has been consistent for some time. But over the years, the indigenous population has climbed considerably. The indigenous population was really reduced and caused much concern because they couldn't withstand measles and many of the diseases that were introduced in the 1800s or so. During the independence in about 1970 for Fiji, the Fijian population was about 44%, whereas the Indo-Fijian population was about 51%. So over the next 37 years, to the last census, which was in 2007, the Indo-Fijian population had gone down by 13-14%, and the indigenous Fijian population had gone up by 13-14%. The others have been consistent at about 5-6% over the years. So that is the sort of brief composition of population, or the population of Fiji, which may give you an idea or what I'm going to talk about later on about the struggle to get their places in the sun, in so-called paradise, which is deeply in turmoil. For nearly a quarter of Fiji population who were born during or after 1987 and are today 34 years or under, have only known a way of life that is associated with political instability arising out of the coup and its related socio-economic problems of declining economic development, rising level of unemployment and poverty, loss of highly skilled professional people moving abroad, deteriorating law and order situation, and generally creating a high level of uncertainty, and indeed perpetuate a violent society. Perhaps one of the most telling features of society they are growing into, especially for those who are attending tertiary institutions or are entering work for the first time, is the rising authoritarianism of society they are in, with increasing military personnel being placed in various positions of leadership. The more discerning among them, with qualifications from either the regional institution or the University of the South Pacific, which like one serves the region in the South, in Suva, or from universities abroad, or from the local and national institution, will most likely begin to discuss with their peers and families how and perhaps why their qualification will not lead them to the dream jobs that the generation of their fathers and uncles before them landed into almost as a matter of right after completing of their education. As young people with education, some of them would naturally be comparing their opportunities and their chances of getting class jobs with those of their relations who, instead of going to the university, joined the military. I'm not in any way trying to decry or progress persons about joining the military. These are choices that young people take. But they would know, as educated young people, that discussing, debating, expressing their dreams in the local papers and media is subjected to strict censorship, and any form of protest, including the so-called peaceful protest, will be dealt with smugly under the current public emergency regulations, very similar to the emergency regulations we hear about in the Middle East and other parts of authoritarian societies. Most of them would know only too well that perhaps one of the best ways available to them, which is as fast and perhaps faster than the well-tried coconut wireless, I'm sure that you have that here as well, to express their frustrations openly like people of their age in other parts of the world, such as those in the Middle East and parts of Asia, is by way of electronic social media like Twitter, the internet, and others. Those of them and others before them that have joined trade unions and even professional organizations, like that of teachers, lawyers, nurses, doctors, accountants, among others, would have been fully aware of these restrictions. They know only too well about some of their peers, both men and women, who had been picked up, some even from their homes, and made to run so many laps in the military camp, or subjected to various treatment, resulting in some well-documented deaths. As yet, there is an attempt, and it's perhaps an unknown to the undiscerning tourists from overseas who visit our shores, that everything is well in paradise, and that anything they may have read or seen about certain turmoil is lost in the smiles of accommodating locals, and in the surf and sand environment for which the Fiji brand of tourism is well known. Even the military dictators are well aware that without the tourism dollar, leadership in paradise may not be worth fighting for. But the dictators are lulled into the belief that everything is well. Even if things are not well, then they should be made to appear that they are well. There are teams of people in the Ministry of Information, Home Affairs, and other sections whose work it is to see to it that the so-called image perfect is maintained and that everybody is happy in paradise. I hope I'm not discouraging those that are about to go to Fiji by saying this. From this picture perfect viewpoint, it is only those local scholars and academics, that are creating all the problems. Human rights organizations, the Commonwealth, the Pacific Islands Forum, and what they perceive as the unfriendly and unhelpful democratic governments of Australia, New Zealand, the United States, the European Union, and the European Union, that are giving them problems about democracy and human rights. They are painting another reality about Fiji, different from the ones the dictators know. And they think they know better. After all, they live there, so they are. There is therefore this so-called information disconnect, where what is believed is different from the reality. And the longer it goes on, the greater is the gap between the perception of leaders and the ordinary people's experience of reality. It may be convenient for a little while, but as the dictators begin to believe in their own propaganda, they become more entrenched, and the struggle to restore democracy and the rule of law is delayed yet again, and is treated almost like an afterthought. Such is the danger in small states like Fiji, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where even the UN, despite the awful record of human rights violations of the Fiji military, and their record of taking over of democratically elected governments, the Fijian soldiers are still being used by the UN as peacekeepers, who are expected to act as protectors of democracy in some other distant parts of the world. There is that kind of disconnect on one hand. You will go and keep peace in Africa, in the Middle East, and so forth. When you come home, then you arrest your own clan, your own group, those people who are different from you, and so forth. Let's look at the anatomy of coups in Fiji, having give you that introduction. Let me have a look at 3 coups in Fiji. These are the main coups, and I don't want to go into, there were minor coups and sub-coups and sub-lots of the main coups. But I think if I were to discuss those, we'll be here the whole day. So I think myself major coups at which I served in various capacities, and I have very good personal experience, nasty personal experiences from those. All these coups, 3 coups, the 1987 coup of the then Lieutenant Colonel, Major, and later Major General Sidibe Rabuka, who comes from my next village next to mine, and my mother is the leader. The second one is the coup of George Strait of 2000. And Commodore Bainimarama's coup of December 2006. I still haven't recovered from Bainimarama's coups because I was supposed to go a few weeks afterwards to represent Fiji to the UN office in New York as permanent representative of the country. But as soon as that took place, I had to say goodbye to that position, and also being a senator. There's only one of the many things that happen to you when you are working in the context. All these coups led to the deposition of democratically elected governments, the prime ministers and their cabinet, members of parliament, and many permanent heads of various ministries were seen to be closely associated with the proposed government and their policies, and who may be perceived as possible threat to the changes brought about by the new or interim administrations. We have so many interim administrations, interim administrations because of these changes in our situation. In looking at these coups, we will focus on 5 areas, I thought, in order to understand the anatomy of coup. The manner of takeover by a group leader, how it takes over, kicks everybody in parliament, and then it takes over the government. 2, the reason and justifications for the coup, which for public consumption, new policies and beneficiaries. What are the new policies? Who are likely to be the beneficiaries of those policies? Community reactions, both local and international community. And last but not least, plans for the legitimization of the coup and the restoration of democracy. They always deal with how do they legitimize their own position by taking over government. And secondly, how do they restore the democracy that they have already destroyed? So that all is their agenda. This analysis, I hope, will also highlight some themes running through all the coups, which will give us some understanding of strengths and weaknesses of the various actions and strategies of that, and the outcomes and lessons learned from various actions. Let's begin with the Rabuka School in 1987. Rabuka, unfortunately or fortunately, is my cousin. And on this particular occasion, on this particular coup, he was surprised. He was expecting that he would be confronted by an Indo-Fijian, and instead, his own cousin was confronting him, and he was holding the barrel of the gun in front of him. That is always a joke when members of the family meet together, and I always say, look, he was holding the gun, but his hand was shaking. In his books and biographies, he said he would shoot, but he would shoot to miss. And I knew very well that his hand was shaking. And the joke, and whenever we meet this day, everybody laughs about it. In the takeover of the government for Rabuka School, this was done in Parliament while it was in full session. It was well planned and executed precisely according to the plan. He relied on the elements of practice and was carried out almost without a hitch, except for an unexpected challenge which was neutralized successfully. That challenge was myself. I stood up and said, "What joke is this?" That stood up in the front bench of the government. What kind of joke is this? After all, one of our relations was a speaker of the House, Honorable Militoni Levingila, very respected parliamentarian. He had moved from Ratumar's party, the chiefly party, to the newly formed Labour Party, of which I was an advisor as an academic, and I was persuaded to join them during the elections. And our Prime Minister was Dr. Mavana. The coup maker led the charge. Government parliamentarians were imprisoned for a week. As for the reasons and justifications, the protection of indigenous Fijian interests with respect to land, political control, chiefless system, Fijian values, and Christianity were the primary issues of concern. But Rabuka had studied the subject of coups in a military institution in India and had been waiting for an opportunity to carry this out. So despite the fact that he had been there, he was number 3 in line. The number 1 had gone over to Australia to receive a gift from the Fiji government. And number 2 was acting, and Rabuka was number 3. And he knew the time when he carried out the coup and took over the government and took over the military as well, and promoting himself in the next week as Major General Rabuka from Lieutenant Colonel Sidiwed Rabuka. That's the kind of things that happens only in the coups. The new policies and beneficiaries. Policies on protection of Fijian land. The greater authority to the Great Council of Chiefs. Council of Chiefs, our traditional chiefs, were not very important until that time. In Rabuka's time, he made them choose, select, or nominate the president of the country, what was then called the Governor General. So it was given this very important meaning. For that time, the Council of Chiefs was an assembly that advised Fijian on matters regarding culture, rights, languages, and so forth. But it took a little time when it was given the political authority to select, nominate the president. And the president of the country, of course, Having done that, then the Prime Minister, that person becomes the President of the country. So, but Rabuka had, but this is where the indigenous issues, self-determination issues, the issues of land, the issues of culture, the issues of associated issues that indigenous people are. There are four shores that Maoris also had been fighting while I went for when I was in New Zealand. And very similar to the kind of indigenous issues that we were fighting in Fiji. Rabuka gave a lot of importance to those issues. On reflection, because of this importance that Rabuka gave, he was in fact laying the seed for the next coup of Mai Marama, and I'll tell you later about that. So a coup begets another coup. So if you favor one particular group too much, presumably there will be a coup to make sure that the other people are, their problems are also addressed. New policies and beneficiaries, policies on protection of Fijian land. I talked about that. All these pro-indigenous Fijian provisions were embodied in a new 1990 constitution, which was promulgated to replace the 1970 constitution. So a way of ensuring these things continue after your term as a political was to build it into a new constitution altogether, throw away the old one, and have a new constitution, which you hope would be the constitution for the next 30, 40 years. We have so many constitutions because we have so many coups. And every coup leader thinks that the only way to safeguard the interests of the people leaders have is to write it in the constitution, throw away the old constitution, that becomes the guiding light, at least for the next 2 years or so. There was a strong plans for legitimization of the coup and the restoration of democracy. The new policies were enforced by the state, embodied in the constitution. And they include new electoral provisions that ensure the protection of the rights and interests of indigenous Fijians in perpetuity. Rabuka was hoping that it would be there in perpetuity. He increased the number of Fijian representation. He reversed the elections from cross-voting elections, largely the constitution that he brought about, communal voting, where the Fijians vote for the Fijians, the Indo-Fijians vote for the Indo-Fijians, the others vote for their own representatives in a parliament. So Rabuka did away with the 1970 constitution, which was settled through discussions in England by our representatives, where we tried to work together and negotiated our way through. And instead, we just put them in our separate compartments, put ourselves into separate compartments, and elect our own members, and they kind of fight it out in Parliament. Spades coup in 2000. So, from 1987, Rabuka was able to have a constitution. And that constitution, they were able to elect members of parliament. And these members of parliament were able to have a new constitution of 1997. Interesting, because in Fiji, these people were all elected from the Rabuka's constitution. There were Fijians elected by the Fijians. There were others elected by the general voters constituency. And there were other Fijians elected by the Fijians, headed by J. O'Brien and Emily Jarvis, now in the UN Criminal Court. Surprisingly, those people sat together in Parliament and produced our 1997 Constitution. Very good, a negotiated Constitution. So despite that, we were able to produce it. But in the 1997 Constitution, the first time it was put into practice was in 1999, 2 years afterwards. I was at the university as a professor. Members of my party, the old Labour Party, were still in Parliament. I decided that after 1987 we were kicked out of prison for a week I said, I'm going back to see the Vice Chancellor. I want to see the Vice Chancellor. My own position was still being advertised. But I said, but Dr. Ha, this is a guy from the United Kingdom. He was registrar of Oxford University for 7 years. Very skilled administrator. I said, Dr. Ha, your position has been advertised according to the universal practice. Lower down the line, the bottom of the lecture. I was a reader in the British system. A reader is a kind of a researcher, associate professor is probably the only equivalent we have. So I said, okay, advertise. But we were not allowed to talk to one another. There were some of us who've been blacklisted because we've been thrown out. Members of the Labour Party, we were dangerous. We were not allowed to travel outside, but somehow or another, the Vice Chancellor of the university told me, see you in that hotel at the airport at Sydney. Of course, I was familiar with Sydney. I was educated in Sydney. Okay, which day? This day. It was in the hallway of the university, of this hotel. We just talked. So I handed in my application. Of course, I was appointed at the bottom of the list of the rank as a lecturer. And after a few years, I stayed at the university for 14 years. On the 14th year, the people from the Labour Party said, "Look, Tom, you promised that you will not enter politics until the Dem Constitution is changed into a fair democratic one, where everybody has equal opportunity." Yes, I said, well, we're coming back now. Can you come with us and stand for the election? It was a difficult decision for me as a professor of education and head of the Department of Psychology. I said, okay. So I went in. Barely a year passed. I was the Minister for External Affairs and Deputy Prime Minister of Fiji. And bang, went Spade School of 2000. There goes. Hey, here I go again. But to make things short, I didn't go back to the university. I decided to go to Auckland. So because Dr. Una, my other half, was doing her doctorate, so it was a good opportunity. They created an opening as senior research fellow at the Center for Civic Studies. So I spent over 4 years at the university. Spade School. Spade took over Parliament. I was speaking in the House, presenting a report about affirmative actions for indigenous Fijians and other minorities in Fiji. And it involved all the sections of the House, the lower House of Parliament, 71 members. And then I said, look, and for those of you who have read the book, Spate of Violence, and there is a copy in the library. Unfortunately, I have a university copy with me. I'll return it tomorrow. We'll see on page 1 the story of the bang that happened when I was standing, and they came in, 7 armed men led by Spate. And of course, as soon as I heard the door, the bang happened. In the Parliament House in Fiji, there is a kind of wood out there prevent people from getting into the chamber. And as soon as I had the wood, these people hit the wood and they went down on the floor because they were not familiar with the system. I knew, there's some unexpected people here. And I realized when I looked, this is another group. That was my second. So the book, Spate of Violence, tells you about how that started and the whole of that coup. Spate took all the government parliamentarians. We were arrested while in Parliament on the session of 19th May 2000. Members were separated according to race. Fijians and general electors remained in the main parliamentary chamber. And Indo-Fijians were moved into the office of the government members at an adjoining building nearby. government parliamentarians were imprisoned for 56 days. And we were guided by people carrying guns and automatic weapons, who were members of a special unit in the military. These units broke away from the military. They were called the Counter-Revolutionary Unit, CRW, warfare. Counter-Revolutionary warfare. And they have Spade to do this coup. Here lies one important factor in the coup. No coup is successful without the involvement of the military because of the weaponry and arms that is used. So, and the weapons and arms are only kept in the military camp. There are some provisions for the police to keep some, but most times that's restricted. It is only kept in the arsenal of the Fijian military forces. George Spade led the charge with members of the Counter-Revolutionary Warfare, CRW section of the Fiji military. But he seemed unsure of some details of the plan. He appeared to be waiting for a leader who did not turn up in Parliament, but was forced to lead the group at the non-appearance of the leader. This is the big guessing game that we did afterwards. After this day, we were still trying to find out who was in fact supposed to be the leader. I just heard from some people who just come to Ponape over the weekend that a former commissioner of police that just died. He was the one that everybody was hinting, pointing to, who was supposed to be there to lead the whole group because he didn't come. Bless his soul, he's just there. George Spade was front up and become the leader. You know, while they were there and on stage and the people who were guarding us, he was ringing, trying to get the attention of this person who didn't come. So he had to take over. And the reasons and justification that were given, again, the focus was on the protection of the indigenous Fijian interests, based on restoring power over the Vanua chiefs. The Vanua chiefs are the clan chiefs in particular areas, in the north, the east. They own the land. Vanua means Vanua, land. Whenua, many words describe. Vanua means land in the various parts of the city. You know, they try to build up the importance of Vanua chiefs and also the Methodist Church on the other hand. So the Vanua chiefs and the Methodist Church were given a lot of importance by Spain, and for good reasons. The Methodist Church was the first church that arrived in Fiji. It came in 1885. I was surprised to learn that the Catholicism here in Guam came here around about 1600. I mean, we were still eating one another at the time, until 1835. And the Methodist Church was the first one that came. So compared to your church traditions, we are fairly recent. Again, the justification was that, but the agenda that Spade was espousing became the agenda of a new party called the Conservative Alliance Matantu Vanua Party. Conservative Alliance, and the Fijian ones, Matantu Vanua, means the government of the land party, government of the land, and Conservative Party altogether. It's kind of a counterparty, believing in land, believing in the church and stuff like that. So that was the reasons and justification. This party was supported very strongly by the Methodist Church. This party was supported greatly by the chiefs because they knew they were protected and strengthened by the coup maker. There were new policies and beneficiaries. New policies of Spade and his supporters were in a position to take the government, to take over the government. His core group were arrested and tried for various breaches, ranging from illegal assembly to treason. This is after a while the Fiji military forces were able to take over Spade. They tried for some time. And finally, they were able to come into the building and negotiate with them. They had a truce. And then the condition of the truce was for Spade to get all his followers to return all the arms. If he does that within a period, at about 1 or 2 weeks, they will be given amnesty. Amnesty meaning they will not be charged, will not be taken to court for the illegal activity. Normal case for anybody to take up arms is life sentence. Spade, by the way, is serving a life sentence at the moment in Colorado jail. He has been there since 2001, I think, yes. Community reactions in the international community, the local communities were divided, and the Fiji Labour Party and its People's Coalition had lost the government. But there was a Chandrika Prasad case that contested the case. There was a guy called Chandrika Prasad. He took a case to court and was seeking relief and asking whether the Constitution had been abrogated or not. Now the judge came and said no. The Constitution had not been properly abrogated. In which case, we were, although we'd been kicked out, we were still government. When such judgment is given, it was expected of us, albeit the Prime Minister, my Chaudhry, my colleague, all that he needed to do was to ask the President to convene the Speaker, and then we can go back and start the debate about it. But in this case, I think my friend and colleague, my Chaudhry, realized that he was not as popular. He had been a bit arrogant in the first 12 months when we were in Parliament. And Spade had very strong actions against him. He suspected Mahen Chaudhry. Mahen Chaudhry also, when he was the Reverend Minister in our government, was able to offer the cutting of mahogany to a different company than the one Spade was involved with, the hardwood company. Spade was chairman of the hardwood company of the government, who would organize and ensure that the hardwood in Fiji, I believe our stand on hardwood in Fiji is one of the biggest in the world. And Spade was hopeful because he already had a deal with another banking company. We had gone a Timmermans to America to determine whether other companies could really look after our hardwood cutting and processing, downstreaming and all that. So there will also be a lot of employment for our people in the villages. Spade was very hopeful. But suddenly, the committee found out something about the company and handed the contract to the Commonwealth, to a Commonwealth company. That was one of the very sore points that Spade had against Prime Minister Mahen Chaudhry. And I believe it strengthened his resolve to be part of the takeover team and to lead it when the leader was not, didn't show up. The plans for legitimation of the coup and the restoration of the democracy after the release of the hostages on July 13th and the capture of Spade's core group on July 7, 2000 virtually marked the end of the movement. A final takeover attempt by the counter-revolutionary warfare group on the Fiji military headquarters on November the 12th, which was regarded as a mutiny, was successfully repulsed by the Fiji military forces, and 8 people were killed in the event. So when they were all the members of parliament, or the Spade's team were captured, the CRW decided to mount an attack on the headquarters of the Fiji military. And it was a very nasty shootout. On one side you have the whole battalion, and on the other you have a small team of very high skill, equivalent to the ones that have been that did the damage in Pakistan recently. Those are the kind of level of training that these people have gone But on the defeat by the Fiji military forces of the CRW and the capture of Spain's core group, the movement died out. And that was it there. That we are looking into 2001. Let me have a look at the third coup. Bainimarama's coup, 2006. One of the gripes that Bainimarama had was with the Prime Minister Ngarase, who was elected in 2005 election, 2006 election. Bainimarama, who was commander of the Fiji military forces, after Spate group was captured, came in and appointed Ngarase as an interim prime minister. Ngarase became an interim prime minister. But there was a disagreement between Bainimarama, who appointed, and Mr. Ngarase about their notion of who should have been sent to court and to those who should have been given some releases, because they were either chiefs, they were either very important members of the church, and so forth. So Ngarase devised a system with his Attorney General where a lot of the people were allowed not to first serve their full term, like Spate serving his full term. It's been there since about 2001, it's still there. It's now 2011. There were many of the chiefs. One of the chiefs became as an acting president. He served only for a quarter of the term, and then for some excuse by the Attorney General, he was allowed to go. These angered Bainimarama because Bainimarama, the commander of the Fiji military forces, had fought with the CRW, and a lot of his men had been killed in the process, about a few of 8. And he expected the Prime Minister, the interim Prime Minister, whom he appointed in a situation like that, to ensure that all were tried and given fair hearing at the same time they should serve their full term, unless there are exceptional circumstances for them. Mr. Bainimarama didn't think that he did a good job in that area. So Bainimarama himself decided, and he was thinking about it. There were many warnings that he had given Mr. Ngarase. He told Mr. Ngarase that he didn't like the particular bill called the Tolerance Article, the Reconciliation and Tolerance Bill, which would provide for people to, provided they admit their fault and confess whatever they do, they were given some special conditions. And Mr. Bainimarama thought that was merely an excuse to allow the Prime Minister, Ngarase, to release a lot of other people. So the takeover of the government involved Mr. Ngarase as Prime Minister. But by that time, Mr. Ngarase had gone through the election, and the election was in 2006. Following the escalation of the poor relations between the government and the Fiji military under Bainimarama, and the 9 demands that had been made to the government regarding the early release of convicted supporters of the 2000 coup, the withdrawal of charges against Bainimarama, the withdrawal of 3 controversial government bills on reconciliation, tolerance, and unity bill. The Goli bill was another one that was brought up, where the indigenous people demand the rights to fish on their traditional coastline, similar to the ones that the Maori were requiring in New Zealand, because it wasn't given to them by the Labour Party. They decided to form the Maori Party when I was there. A lot of indigenous groups began to claim their traditional fishing rights. In the same way they regarded the traditional planting areas or the reserves around where the villages in which they settled. The other bill was the land tribunals bill, where a lot of Fijians were complaining about the sale of many of their islands. Some the sails were questionable. Some were bought with axes, some were bought with rum and whiskey, some were bought with muskets. And the Fijian chiefs who had muskets were the ones who conquered the other chiefs and declared and covered and became chief of a large area. And the current major chief in Fiji of the island of Bahawa was one such person. He had Mr. Savage, he had a lot of muskets, and he had a lot of people who came with him, white settler, and then he was able to win the battles for Zakabau, who became the Tui king of Fiji, who was the chief that ceded Fiji to Britain in 1874, and we became colony. So that kind of thing happened in different countries. So the power of the musket, the weaponry as is now being used in all the coups, without that weaponry and ammunition, nobody is able to carry out an effective coup in Fiji. It's same in the old days. Chiefs became strong because they had access to the musket. And all you need was a couple of muskets. I remember a very interesting story about Zakambau, this chief that I'm talking about. He came through the river, the biggest river in Fiji. There were a lot of settlements around this river. You would go up these double hull canoes into the river and settle disputes and fight for smaller chiefs who were not obeying, were not acknowledging the taxes that should have been paid to him or contributed to him. He came on this particular island called Verata. Verata Island is right on the edge of the river, near the about a few miles from the natural town. Helen will know that well. And then as they came along, all Vakambau's warriors, they are in this big canoe. And then in Fijian custom before the fight, there is also a challenge from the land, and for those in the boat will have to do the equal challenge. So the Fijians started doing the warrior dance, the challenge dance. And as they were doing the warrior dance, they had a sound, bang. And suddenly one of them fell. Oh, they thought it was only an accident, that something went wrong with him, so they stood up again and started the warrior dance. And then there was another bang. And this time there was also a kind of a light, a smoke associated with something somebody else fell. To this day, that spot is marked. A reminder to the villagers that that was the first time that the muskets were being used to fight against warriors. So, when things came to a head on December the 5th, the President dissolved Parliament, and the military under Bainimarama took control of the country. The inside story is that the President, an old chief from West say over 80 years old on the other side of the island, was a bit worried about what to do. And that year was the commander coming. Jan arrived there, President, I want to dissolve Parliament, and I will take over. And he didn't know what to do. There was an eminent judge, Ratu Manraiwiwi, was the vice president. And he said yes to Bainimarama that he was willing to sign a piece of paper drawn by the lawyers of the military, giving the order for the dissolution of Parliament and taking over the country by the Fiji military forces. And then this Judge Ratu Manraiwiwi, who's like me, is doing a similar reconciliation process in the Solomon Islands, resulting from the clashes between two islands. It's similar to the process that was done in South Africa by Bishop Tutu in Czech to try to reconcile various groups following the war there. He left, and then he told the big chief. He had only primary education, and he was a teacher in a primary school. So Do you know what he did? You shouldn't be acceding to that. You are the commander of the Fiji military forces. You are the president of Fiji. You should now deny that you should tell him that you don't want it. And of course, there was that. We all heard another message coming that the president has indicated to his press secretary that he had not signed any such dissolution of parliament. So the denials go in and out, and then Bainimarama came back and told him straight away, either you do it or you are out. And suddenly there was a declaration that the parliament has been dissolved. And the next day, Bainimarama went on air and said, the Fiji military forces is in control of the country. The president has signed an order declaring that parliament should be dissolved and the use of stuff and all that and all that. And the next day also, all the ministers in their offices were surrounded with their cars, were taken. They were supposed to vacate their houses from the domain and their offices, because a new set of ministers will be there the following week. That kind of instructions from the military. So that was the coming on of Bainimarama. The reasons and justifications given by Bainimarama. But before I get into that, I must talk about Mr. Garasay. When they were trying on this particular day, the 5th of December, they came and they were surrounded his house, and we were there. And the police were defending that thing, and the military were trying to burst into Garasay's house, take whatever government property there is, and he should also clear out of his house because he was no longer the prime minister. That kind of deal. The parliament, I was in the Senate this time, the nomination of Mr. Garasay. I'm responsible for education and information. And we had a last duty to do. The military had figured it wrong because he thought that both the lower house and the upper house had all finished their duties. But no, we had to approve the budget for the year. That was December. It was important for that budget to be passed. Otherwise you have no money for January. Yeah. So, and that morning we had a quick meeting with our senators. And I said, look, we pass this bill quickly and then I will give you the floor. Right? We went over there, all these chiefs were in there and all that. They were members of the House and selected people chosen by the Prime Minister. So we went out there, all these chiefs. And then we did it very quickly. Right? By that time, all the ministers were moving out of their houses. Their cars were being taken. But here we were, we had to do this little business. This is the 6th of December. So I was on my feet again, moving a motion. We condemned this coup and all the circumstances and all that. And suddenly there was a chief, it was the president of the Senate. We don't have a speaker of the Senate. We have the speaker of the lower house, but a president of the Senate. I noticed the president of the house was trying to signal to me. He was saying, hurry up, because he was being poked from the back with the barrel of a gun. And then I looked outside and saw tons of soldiers. Right? And then I realized, we've been under pressure. So I then finished my speech and said, I recommend these bills loud. As soon as I sat down, a couple of others stood up. And one spoke in Fijian, another one spoke in Hindi, and they wanted to get the record into the minutes of the Senate that they too supported the motion. And then by that time, the soldiers who've been waiting, listening to this microphone outside of our conversation to the whole complex, bursting. And forcibly we were forced out of the house. Yes. So that was the 6th. Bainimarama took over, and is still there at the moment. His reasons is the stated reasons for the coup focus on the need to clean up the country for corruption. The removal of bills that supported the release of the 2,000 coup supporters. Remember? The removal of bills that enhanced ethnic discrimination in favor of particular communities, particularly the Fijian community, the chiefs and so forth. The removal of bills that, In fact, the idea of removing excesses that favor one community against others was seen as a source of instability that created the coup. The target of the military was directed at those communities who had been privileged by previous coups. And in this way, the actions of Bainimarama was read as restoring equality for all communities and removing one of the major sources. That was his argument. Favoring one particular community too much would create instability. I will come later on to examine the whole issue of indigenous rights and the issue of equality in a country of diverse background. Some are indigenous, some are non-indigenous, some are born there, brought up there, and some are coming from overseas. That is a real issue also that we face, and also facing some countries in the city. And so was the Methodist Church, which was the first church to come into the country, was closely associated with Fijian chiefs and the Fijian people. The chiefs and the Fijian people naturally were not amused when the military, which comprised 99% of the indigenous Fijians, in their view, were being used to support anti-Fijian policies. It is interesting because the military is basically indigenous, 99.9%. And here, the Fijian soldiers were being used against the Fijian chiefs, against the kind of privileges. They were not really privileges because all our previous constitutions had built into the constitution the fact of the indigenous coming and their land and the way they fish were part and parcel of trans provisions of any constitution. But the difficulty was that some of the coup leaders added on so much more than those trans provisions, which was really adequate. I mean, nobody would buy the land, nobody would take the land. Right? We are not allowed even to sell our land to another Fijian. No, we can't. Nobody would deal with those. So those entrance provisions are entrance provisions, and I think what had been done by Spate and in a way by Rabuka, they added on those extra provisions, which created discomfort for the Fijian military forces, particularly when looking for the source of inequality that caused conflict and so forth. And some current policies affecting Fijian land and resources under the guise of equality of provisions and opportunities in bring about consternation and deep concern among the indigenous Fijian community. Thus, Bainimarama's policies are eyed with concern and suspicion by the indigenous community that comprise 58%, 57% of the population of Fiji. Here, Bainimarama has been doing a number of advocating for a number of policies on Fijian land, where he's created a land bank, where people can have access to Fijian land without consulting the owner. That is a very dangerous one. That is one of the things that is going on at the moment. There's been a lot of Koreans and Chinese who come in. They want to have plantations and so forth. There are a lot of stretches of land which presumably, according to them, empty. But there are owners in every rivers and every creek and every piece of earth in Fiji is owned. It's only those people who think that are not owned because they are not aware of the culture and traditions of the So, with these policies that Bainimarama is doing, it is possible for these people to access this, to access traditional fishing areas, without paying anything to fish the waters for tuna, which we have 75% of the world tuna, 75% of the world's tuna in this, and that's needed very badly by the European Union. And the trade on that is beginning. But before we even get it, you have so many Chinese ship boats, Korean boats, and many other boats from Asia. A number of people in these islands, in Fiji and in Kiribati, are authorizing these people to do this. Those permits are really for so indigenous people. And sometimes they sell those permits. A lot of them have a number of permits. By selling the permits, you're selling your resources abroad. So there is exploitation of your ownership. And that's creating a bit of problem for us as well. Some current policies affecting Fijian land and resources, as I said before, is being a major concern. Now, the community reactions and local and international community reactions. The reactions of both local and international communities are mixed. One consideration is the fact that while equalizing opportunities are good, it has to work. If it has to work, it has to require the cooperation of all communities involved, especially in small communities, which are dependent on each other. The three constitutions of Fiji, they of the 1970, they of 1990 by the book, and the negotiated Fiji Constitution of 1977 all have recognized the importance of enhanced provision safeguarding the indigenous Fijian community. Any chances to the Constitution affecting any changes to the Constitution affecting this provision require support of the indigenous community. Changes done during past coups have always, as a matter of tradition, required the consent of the community concerned. This is an issue that confronts Mr. Bainimarama with his policies that come up. This issue affects many provisions of the Constitution, including electoral matters, representation in Parliament, and so forth. The international community are usually guided by negotiated solutions involving all affected communities, which in a coup period is not always feasible, especially between competing groups. Now I get to the plans for the legitimization of the coup and the restoration of democracy. This is really a work in progress at this time, as the interim administration of Bainimarama is proposing to hold the election in 2014 and begin preparing work 2 years before that time, preparation work 2 years before that time. Fiji has been under pressure from the Commonwealth to hold election some years ago. And because that has not eventuated, it has been suspended from this body. Similarly, the Pacific Islands Forum has also suspended Fiji for failing to meet its election deadline. The European Union, for which most of the independent countries of the Pacific Islands are members of its ACP grouping, are also pressurizing Fiji on the same issue of democracy and human rights. This has to be done. It is going to fully benefit from the European Union's developing assistance and provisions for international trade with the EU. I would now look at some of the emerging things, having looked at I know that I must hurry a little bit. In the rough analysis of coups in Fiji in the 24 years, a number of themes and observations are possible. And they fall into two groups. Those that are procedural in nature and do not require some philosophical basis of analysis, and those that do, if they are to be addressed adequately. If you begin with the latter first, I would place 4 such lessons and observations as follows. This is the one that requires a little bit of philosophical thinking. 1, the issue of indigenous rights or rights of self-determination and that of equal rights for all citizens. This is the issue that is confronting Mr. Bainimarama, and its solution will determine, in a coup situation, whether there will be another coup or not. This situation in Fiji gives its history and given its history and tradition, has attracted a lot of attention and has been addressed through numerous constitutional negotiations. It is an issue that can only be solved, I suggest, by negotiation, through the democratic processes and institutions. Democracy provides the basis for its lasting solution. The next issue is one relating to the need for a large military of some 50,000 men and women who are maintained by the state for supposedly national security. When this issue was discussed some time ago, a question was raised as to who is likely to be our enemy to invade us. The answer was given in jest in that serious discussion about our national security, and we should keep enough full-time men and women to guard against a likely flotilla of canoes from Tuvalu or Kiribati in search for land when they are threatened by the rising sea level. Whenever that question is raised, who is our enemy? Who is going to be inviting us? The answer has always been, we're worried about some Melanesian, Polynesian, some of our groups of islands might bring a flotilla of canoes. So we have to keep 5,000 men and women full time to make sure that our national security is uppermost. The answer for politicians are clear. We need to reduce the size of the military. But how? Should we limit our military and navy to safeguarding our 300-mile limit of shorelines from foreign yachts carrying drugs and indulging in human trade? How can we prevent the military from overstepping their political masters, to whom they should take orders from, rather than the other way around? That issue is one which all the coup governments have not been able to address, and that is the issue of economic development. In situation of instability, where avenues for addressing lost contracts or investment or huge compensations, where companies are involved, justice through the courts are usually required. Without some cast iron guarantee of that nature, large investors and companies leave our shores for better and safer environment in business. The consequence is seen in high unemployment, rising cost of business, and depressing and spiraling levels of economic activities. The figures for economic development since 2007, for example, compared to democratic periods before that, is a case in point, where growth figures for all the years is barely positive. Fiji is behind most of the comparable Pacific countries, whereas in its democratic heyday, she was head and shoulders above these countries in the Pacific. If Kukuland were a canoe, you would have turned into a submarine. 4. The rising level of authoritarianism is beginning to set in with our coup tradition. Young men and women, even our educated people, are beginning to resort to quick solutions through aggressive behaviors as a means of resolving issues at school and in our communities. Our Pacific tradition, where we sit together around the cover board, perhaps chewing and exchanging betel nuts, or the traditional exchange of toddy or mai-mai, as you know in some places, is giving way to aggressive and what would be considered as unacceptable behaviors in our traditional societies. No wonder we have in our present communities deposed people from politics, especially in my own country. As for the more procedural issues, there are a few which I will only raise and leave it for future discussion. 1. A coup begins another. That means a coup in Fiji situation requires or lay basis for another. Why do we have one in the first place? The current thinking as seen in the words of Bainimarama, is that he is going to end all coups by his coup. I hope it is a way of answering the question of others, which do not deserve any serious consideration, because our experience in Fiji is just otherwise. 3. A coup does not solve any issue, just like violence. It only suppresses behavior and not rhetoric. If that is the case, why can't we educate our people and this simple fact? I embrace too many issues instead of answering. And I do that because in our Pacific tradition, it is usually because, as a visitor, I am comfortable in your country and in your company. With that note, I thank you for your patience and indulgence.
Are there any questions from the audience? Does anybody have any questions? Please. Can you go on that side?
So, how much of an influence was the corporatization of Fiji? If there was no corporatization or this kind of wheeling and dealing with the chiefs and whatnot, would there even ever been a coup?
You talk about corporatization, and then you talk about chiefs. Okay, can I get the gist of, do you think that corporatization is tied to shifting behavior or something?
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm asking, like the things with Fiji water, you mentioned like the hardwoods and whatnot, like, are these people that are in the military and are they doing their own side deals, like, is this?
I think there is a lack of accountability with all that has been done by the military in Fiji. I'm not referring to the activities of the military in the Lago Island. There are things that Commodore Bainimarama is doing now, which the rest of Fiji are aware, particularly in regards to the handling of Fijian land. A lot of Chinese and a lot of people looking for land have been given pieces of land which traditionally would not have been possible without the consent of the owners of the land and also the Native Land Trust. It looks after the land for the indigenous Fijians. Bainimarama has already modified the composition of those committees, chairmanship of that land and all that in the Native Land Trust Board. So it is possible really with this team of men who are members of cabinet, dishing out laws through promulgation without the members of the public aware and discussing the draft copies of these laws before these laws are in fact being promulgated. So these things are happening. The lack of accountability makes it very, very difficult even for me, as an MP to know the kind of things he's doing with the land. And also there is also the Public Emergency Act. If I criticize everything that I say, my paper will be looked at like like a hawk's eye, with a hawk's eye, and they will try and find ways and means to call me up and straighten me up. But fortunately, there's a number of us in Fiji who are able to stand up and speak, and the only guarantee of our safety is our ability to write books, speak publicly, and that's one thing that they really is scared of. To stand here and say something about it, that's one thing they wouldn't touch you. So your freedom really is your ability to speak the truth.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I think we all learned. Oh, you got one? Speaker Wanda?
I'd like to know either your position or the position of the people in Fiji about their indigenous self-determination versus equal democracy. Equal rights.
The process?
No, your position is versus people, it's
We-
all other residents or citizens of
Yes.
Fiji.
There is a overwhelming support for indigenous rights and the rights of self-determination. I am very involved myself in advocating for Fijians. But I come through the Labour Party. The Labour Party is a multi-racial party formed in the towns. It's predominantly it's membered by Indo-Fijians, but there are the first Prime Minister was Dr. Gawanda, who was also Fijian. And a few of us got into that because we realized that it's the only way to move forward in a multi-racial country instead of working in all ethnic communities. So those who are educated in towns, you deal with everybody else. And that's how you get into the Labour Party. But we've been involved with the negotiation for indigenous rights. We had a number of conferences in the drafting of the UN Convention on Indigenous Rights. I was supposed to go to New York the first week of January 2007, basically to be there when the Indigenous Rights Bill was passed. It was passed in September 2007. And what is of interest, if you follow that bill, Fiji was not in the House when the bill was voted on. I'm not sure whether Dr. Underwood is aware of that. Secondly, the 4 countries in the world that didn't vote for the indigenous conventions were the settled countries that we are dealing with. Without being nasty, it's Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States. 4 countries that didn't sign. For the Australians, it is clear because they had some issues with the Aboriginals. The Mambo decision, which challenged the whole concept of land in Australia. The British concept of land is unless the land is fenced, it is not owned. It's clear as whatever it is, it's unowned because it is not enclosed. The Aborigines who had mining towns in northern Australia brought the issue of Mambo, which is their traditional area where they buried a lot of their ancestors, where they settled, they brought it in. And they said, we don't fence our land. Right? We know the boundaries of our land. It is not our custom. It is our custom, but it is not ours. So their whole concept of the vacant land was challenged in court in Australia. And Australia is trying to grasp that issue now. A lot of the implication will be all those decisions that are hinged, are based on those kind of notions, and taking land from the indigenous to give it out to others because they were not fenced, will have to be reassessed. So they have done an apologies to the Aborigines, reconciliation. So they are in the process of relooking at all that. If they had signed that convention, they would have to deal with those issues. And the same with Canada and the United States and the Maori in New Zealand. New Zealand government now, the Conservative Nationalist Party, National Party in New Zealand. The Maori Party is now together with the National Party in New Zealand because the Maori Party have decided not to be permanently part of the Labour Party like they have done everywhere. The Indians, they usually identify with Labour. Right? Now the Maori Party in New Zealand, because the Labour Party didn't give them the right for the foreshores, they were looking, if they could secure the foreshores, because the foreshores is a kind of area where traditionally you go to collect a few shells. It's part of the diet of indigenous Maori. And because the Labour didn't support them, they went across to the other side. Now the other side, now the Prime Minister is now in the National Party, not Labour. And the Maoris are with them. So the Maoris have decided towards the former party. And whichever party is going to give benefits to the Maori for indigenous lands and all those kind of stuff, they move over. And because they are so well even without the Maoris. There's about 7 Maoris. And they all shift whichever way. Wherever they shift, it becomes a government. So they have that negotiating skill, and thereby they can derive some benefits. I think that's an issue that, that a lot of us, the settler mentality makes that assumption that you don't fancy, and it's not yours. The indigenous people don't fancy the land. They know the limits to the rivers and the creeks and the trees and all that. And every bit of land is owned. If they are not used, it doesn't mean they are not owned. They are owned. So, yes, I have been very involved. Before I came here, my wife and I have been part of the indigenous Institute of Indigenous Studies, the research, culture, research, Fijian wisdom, write books about a lot of that, because a lot of that is lost. And if we merely try to promote our culture without really understanding it, without researching it, we, like you, layers and layers of colonization, the Spanish, the Japanese, the Americans and all that. In order really to understand yourself, you've got to really look at what is the indigenous basis and what has been the special contributions of various communities that have come in. And unless you understand that, it's very difficult really to talk about indigenous this, indigenous that. The basis is in research. And indigenous research now, sorry if I take this too long, but that's my pet subject, indigenous research. I was a senior research fellow at the University of Auckland and studied the way we use indigenous research. Indigenous research is now in the literature. In the whole, the top literature is there. It's accepted as part and parcel of the different kinds of scientific research, action research. There is indigenous research. It's governed by different rules, different ownership of information. I'm sorry, I'm getting on with this, but because that's my area. I hope that I've somehow touched on some of the concerns. So certainly the self-determination is an issue.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Penny. I just want to offer a couple of observations. It's very important that we discuss that because we saw the delinquent property list today. So lots of people are affected by that. But I do want to state that, when I was still in the U.S. House, one of the things that we did, I did regularly was to visit Pacific Command, and I would ask for briefings on various subjects, and I did ask for a briefing on the Spate coup. And in that briefing, they actually had a bunch of satellite pictures of where you were being held. And I never made that connection until today because they showed in great detail the armed vehicles and the positioning of soldiers. And, as always in doing contingency planning, they outline what it would take to rescue you. So I want you to know that that was under some consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So on behalf of the university, we'd like to present you with this gift to commemorate your lecture. I appreciate it very much, and I want you to know that we do take